So the specimen used for optical aggregometry is platelet-rich plasma, which is prepared by gentle centrifugation of citrated whole blood. So nire-recommend ni Rodak that the platelet concentration should be approximately 200 to 300,000 platelets per microliter. So this range would ensure yung optimal optical detection of aggregation. So, kapag masyado kasing mababa yung platelet counts, yung aggregation signals kasi pwede siyang mag-appear as very weak. So, if platelet counts are too high, the plasma may also be excessively turbid, which can also distort optical measurement. Aside from the platelet count itself, another critical factor is timing. So, platelet function deteriorates over time. So, after collection, the testing and after collection and processing, testing should occur within about mga 90 minutes of specimen collection. And certain specific specimen conditions can also interfere with optical measurement, and this would include hemolysis, lipemia, and icterus. So all of these conditions kasi, di ba, they affect yung clarity ng plasma. So magkakaroon siya ng interference sa light transmission measurements. So, thus, platelet aggregometry requires careful specimen handling, rapid processing, and strict quality control. So, TLDR, lahat ng requirements sa specimen are factors that would affect yung measurement of the yung optical light measurement. Okay, aside from that, we also have whole blood platelet aggregometry or impedance aggregometry using whole blood samples. So the principle is based on electrical impedance or electrical resistance. So sa method na ito, the sample would contain two electrodes. Ayan, kita siya. Yung two electrodes that are immersed in whole blood, kapag nag-add tayo ng platelet agonists, platelets would begin to adhere and aggregate onto the electrode surface. As you can see, ito. So as platelets aggregate, or platelet aggregates rather, accumulate doon sa electrodes, they increase electrical resistance between the electrodes. Tapos yung instrument, it would continuously measure this change in electrical impedance over time. So the key concept here is kapag mas madami yung platelet aggregation, mas malaki or mas greater ang electrical impedance. So this method has the advantage of analyzing platelets in a more physiologic environment. So since the sample still contains yung mga RBCs, leukocytes, and plasma components, parang it would more readily or easily replicate physiologic processes happening in the body. So what are the advantages of whole blood aggregometry over traditional optical aggregometry? So first, again, it provides a more physiologic testing environment because of the other blood components that are present influencing platelet function. Second is the test does not require preparation of platelet-rich plasma. So it would simplify yung pag-prepare natin ng sample. And it can be combined with platelet secretion studies, allowing simultaneous evaluation of platelet activation and granule release. So those are its advantages. However, it also has a few limitations. So the sample is whole blood. So the test is strongly influenced by platelet count as well as the hematocrit value. So kapag masyadong mababa ang platelet counts or abnormal ang hematocrit, aggregation results may then be altered. So in addition, whole blood methods provide less control over platelet concentration compared with platelet-rich plasma-based optical techniques. So for this reason, light transmittance aggregometry would still remain as the reference method for detailed platelet function studies, while for rapid clinical assessments, mas ginagamit ang impedance aggregometry. And then lastly, we have platelet lumiaggregometry or secretion testing. So another specialized method which evaluates platelet secretion in addition to aggregation. So to understand this test, remember, diba, our platelets contain storage granules, particularly dense granules, which would release molecules such as, anong nire-release ng platelets from its storage granules when it is activated? Sena Nika or Senya ba to? Absent? Andrade Mirabel? Andrade Mirabel? Absent din? Oh, ano sagot? Di ba platelets contain three major types ng secretory storage granules? Magbigay ka lang ng example. Okay, that is correct. So, wait lang. Okay. So, di ba sa storage granules, we have yung alpha granules, dense, and lysosomes. So, in this case, we're talking particularly more of dense granules. So, these granules contain small molecules essential for platelet activation, specifically ADP, ATP, serotonin, and calcium when platelets are activated. Thank you sa pag-answer. And then these substances would play important role in amplifying platelet aggregation. So Lumi aggregometry would measure yung release reaction by detecting yung ATP released from platelet dense granules. So the assay uses a luciferin-luciferase reaction, which is the same biochemical principle used in firefly bioluminescence. So when ATP is present, yung luciferase enzyme would produce light, and the instrument measures this luminescence. So therefore, the test rather simultaneously records yung aggregation of platelets as well as secretion of ATP. So this dual measurement allows the laboratory to determine kapag yung platelets ay kayang mag-aggregate normally but fail to release granule contents, which is characteristic of certain platelet disorders. And one example here is yung platelet storage pool disease, where granule release is defective. Excuse me, wait lang. Excuse me. Okay, so interpretation or interpreting Lumi aggregometry results requires analyzing both aggregation and secretion curves, as you will see in the figure sa screen. So, if platelet aggregation appears normal, pero the ATP release is reduced, this would suggest platelet secretion defect. And in this situation, platelets can aggregate, pero they fail to properly release the mediators needed to amplify platelet activation. So this pattern is typical sa mga dense granule pool, storage pool disorders. On the other hand, if parehas reduced ang aggregation and ATP secretion, this would suggest a broader abnormality in platelet activation pathways, which may involve mga abnormalities sa platelet receptor, intracellular signaling defects, as well as disorders of platelet activation mechanism. So, secretion testing provides an additional important layer of information beyond standard aggregation studies alone. So it allows laboratory to distinguish aggregation defects and secretion defects, which may present with similar clinical bleeding symptoms. Okay. So, ano ba yung platelet agonists na kanina ko pa sinasabi na we add in testing for aggregometry? So, we use different agonists, and again, each agonist would activate platelets through a different receptor pathway that would allow us to probe specific aspects of platelet function and would then allow us to rule in or rule out specific disorders or diseases. And common agonists used in platelet aggregometry would include ADP, thrombin, TRAP or thrombin receptor activating peptide, epinephrine, collagen, arachidonic acid, and ristocetin. So, these agonists are not interchangeable. So, bawat isa kasi sa kanila would test a different platelet receptor system or biochemical pathway. So, sa pag-observe natin sa paano nagre-respond ang platelets sa isang sample to different or each agonist, we can identify specific platelet disorders. So, for example, abnormalities in certain agonist responses may indicate defects sa receptors, secretion pathways, or signaling cascades. So, platelet aggregometry functions like a functional map of platelet aggregation pathways. So, isa-isahin lang natin sila, yung different agonists na we use. So, one of the most commonly used agonists in platelet aggregometry is ADP or adenosine diphosphate. So, ADP activates platelets through ADP receptors sa platelet membrane that would trigger yung platelet aggregation. Yung aggregation response sa ADP depends sa concentration na ginamit. So, at low concentrations, ADP produces reversible primary aggregation, and this means that platelets temporarily aggregate pero nagdi-disperse din sila ulit. At higher concentrations, ADP would trigger the release reaction, causing platelets to release dense granules content such as ADP and thromboxane. So this amplification produces secondary aggregation, which is stronger and irreversible. So ADP responses are useful for detecting mga secretion defects or receptor-related abnormalities. So, let's say ang gagamitin mo is yung higher concentration that can produce secondary aggregation. So, kapag absent ang secondary aggregation, this may indicate aspirin effect or platelet secretion defects. So, again, ano lang natin, further try to drive home yung aggregation pattern. So, if low concentration ng ADP, primary aggregation only, higher concentrations can produce primary and secondary aggregation. And again, if absent ang secondary wave, possible secretion defect. Another is yung thrombin and yung TRAP. So, thrombin is one of the strongest physiologic activators ng platelets. So, nagbabind siya sa protease-activated receptors or yung PAR receptors sa surface ng platelets that would trigger rapid platelet activation and aggregation. However, using thrombin directly in aggregometry can cause complications kasi thrombin can also convert fibrinogen to fibrin that could lead to clot formation. So, to avoid this issue sa thrombin, sa lab we use TRAP or thrombin receptor activating peptide because TRAP or TRAP would activate the same thrombin receptor sa platelets pero hindi siya nagtitrigger ng fibrin formation. So, TRAP would allow us to evaluate thrombin receptor mediated platelet activation na di nagkakos ng interference with clot formation. So, it is particularly useful for assessing yung strength ng platelet activation pathways. Another is epinephrine and collagen. So, first with epinephrine, it would activate platelets through yung alpha-2 adrenergic receptors sa platelet surface. So, compared sa ibang agonists such as yung thrombin and collagen, epinephrine generally produces a weaker aggregation response. Because the response is relatively weak or mild, ginagamit ang epinephrine for detecting subtle abnormalities sa platelet secretion pathways. And one classic finding associated with epinephrine testing is the loss of the secondary aggregation wave in patients taking aspirin or other cyclooxygenase inhibitors. Aside from that, we also have collagen. So collagen is a strong physiologic agonist kasi it represents what platelets encounter when vascular endothelial injury exposes yung subendothelial collagen fibers. So unlike ATP, collagen-induced aggregation would show a characteristic lag phase bago mag-start ang aggregation. So this delay occurs because platelets must first undergo activation and release reactions bago mag-proceed to aggregation. So ginagamit siya. It is particularly helpful for identifying defects in platelet secretion pathways and thromboxane-mediated signaling, including aspirin-like effects. Another is arachidonic acid. So this agonist specifically evaluates the cyclooxygenase thromboxane pathway, which plays a major role in platelet activation. So when platelets are stimulated, arachidonic acid is converted by the enzyme cyclooxygenase into thromboxane A2, a powerful mediator that promotes platelet aggregation and vasoconstriction. However, this pathway kasi it can be disrupted by certain medications such as aspirin which irreversibly inhibit cyclooxygenase. And dahil binablock ng aspirin ang thromboxane production, platelets exposed to aspirin will show absent or reduced aggregation when we try to stimulate it with an agonist such as arachidonic acid. So for this reason, ginagamit siya to detect aspirin exposure or aspirin-like platelet defects. And lastly, we have ristocetin. So, sa lahat na na-discuss natin, siya ang pinaka-unique na ginagamit in platelet testing kasi unlike other agonists, ristocetin does not activate platelets through typical signaling pathways. Instead, nag-i-induce siya ng platelet agglutination by facilitating interaction between von Willebrand factor and platelet GP1B receptor. So in other words, it forces von Willebrand factor to bind to platelet GP1 or other IP, causing platelets to clump together. At because of this mechanism, ristocetin testing is extremely important sa pag-evaluate ng von Willebrand factor or GPIB receptor. So two classic disorders associated with abnormal ristositine responses are von Willebrand disease and Bernard-Solier syndrome. So in von Willebrand disease, merong deficient or dysfunctional von Willebrand factor preventing ristositine-induced platelet agglutination. And whereas in Bernard-Solier syndrome, the problem lies sa platelet GP1B receptor, which prevents platelets from binding sa von Willebrand factor. So ristositine would provide us a powerful tool for evaluation of platelet adhesion disorders. So as you can see, very different siya sa mga other agonists that we talked about earlier. So therefore, tatanong ko siya sa exam. Okay, so I think ito na yung last with the platelet agonists and aggregometry testing itself. Before we move forward, meron ba kayong questions or clarifications so far? Okay, if wala ng tanong, let's proceed. So again, as we said, diba, pre-analytical testing and or variables would highly affect platelet testing. So out of those, let's start with anticoagulant. So many, diba, ang ginagamit natin is the standard anticoagulant, 3.2% sodium citrate for processing samples for coagulation studies. And paano nag-work ang sodium citrate? Anong kanyang working principle? Apolonio Cesca. Okay, absent. Wait lang. Podra. Ophel. Podra, are you with us? Nag-chat ka pala. Okay, so diba sodium citrate works by binding calcium ions that prevents clot formation while the sample is being processed. So thank you everyone for answering. Naaral na to, kailan ba to? Second year pa, diba? Anyway, so sodium citrate works like that, and the ratio between the blood and anticoagulant must be precisely maintained. So the correct ratio would typically be 9 parts blood with 1 part anticoagulant. So if the tube is underfilled, masyado madaming anticoagulant relative to plasma can artificially prolong clotting times. And it can also produce invalid coagulation results and should be rejected. And because of these factors, proper specimen collection is essential for accurate coagulation testing. Aside from that, we have another, which is adjustment when it comes to hematocrit. So another important variable is hematocrit level. So patients with extremely high hematocrit, typically greater than 55%, the plasma volume in the specimen would be significantly reduced. And dahil naglalagay tayo ng citrate anticoagulant based sa total blood volume, so we rely on yung average packed blood cells sa pag-come up with a ratio ng anticoagulant to blood. So this situation would result in excess citrate relative to plasma, which can artificially prolong clotting times. So saang sakit or disease tayo possible makakita ng high hematocrit level? Okay, so thank you for answering. So high hematocrit levels or erythrocytosis are primarily caused by myriad of factors. So siguro pinaka well known when it comes to hematologic abnormalities is PV or polycythemia vera. So, due to the overproduction of red blood cells, magkakaroon tayo ng high hematocrit levels. Aside from that, yes, lung diseases such as pulmonary fibrosis or COPD can also cause high hematocrit levels. Use of medications, cardiovascular diseases, dehydration, so all those things. So, always important na i-check natin ang hematocrit level because we need to make necessary adjustments in order to avoid errors in coagulation studies. So again, it can result in excess citrate relative to the plasma in the sample, which can again artificially prolong clotting time. So in these cases, yung volume ng citrate anticoagulant must be adjusted to account for the reduced plasma volume. So other specimen-related problems can also affect coagulation testing, such as short draws, clotted specimens, hemolysis, prolonged tourniquet time, traumatic venipuncture, and delayed specimen processing. All problematic. So all of these issues can alter platelet activation or coagulation factor activity, leading to incorrect laboratory results. So therefore, coagulation testing requires strict adherence to specimen collection protocols. Ano pa? We'll review na lang itong iba. So, order of draw and collection technique, processing time, and temperature. Since storage temperature and centrifugation conditions can also vary depende sa again our intended assays. And lastly is medication history. So always, as we said earlier, aspirin, diba? Aside from that, mga NSAIDs. So again, aspirin would irreversibly inhibit cyclooxygenase in platelets, preventing formation of thromboxane A, which is essential for platelet aggregation. So because platelets lack nucleus, hindi niya kaya mag-synthesize ng bagong enzymes. Therefore, the effect of aspirin persists sa buong lifespan ng isang platelet, which is approximately 7 to 10 days. And then again, NSAIDs or non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Siguro other anti-platelet agents such as Eliquis or clopidogrel, and certain antibiotics or cardiovascular medications. And because of these effects, patients undergoing platelet function tests are often instructed to avoid aspirin or similar medications prior to testing, or sinasama natin siya sa ating patient intake or history taking when we do coagulation testing. Usually, alam naman na nila yan, they are already instructed. Pero it is helpful to make note of it in case lang they are still taking it by the time we do test them for not only platelet function testing but also coagulation testing. So, failure to consider medication history can also lead to misinterpretation of platelet function assays. So, kaya lang natin ni-review yung mga pre-analytical variables kasi napakaselan ng coagulation studies. So, review lang siya. Okay. So, ito, inad ko lang siya. Another thing you could possibly do, I think, when reviewing this is to create tables to draw comparisons between the different tests that we use. Okay, before we move on to secondary hemostasis, meron bang question so far? Sorry, wait lang. Inom lang ako tubig. Okay, so if walang tanong, let's just summarize what we've learned so far. So each test again in primary hemostasis would evaluate different aspects of platelet biology, starting with platelet count, measuring platelet quantity, but provides no information about platelet function. Bleeding time, historically evaluated platelet vessel wall interaction, but has largely been replaced by modern methods. Platelet function analyzer, serving as a screening tool for platelet-related disorders and von Willebrand disease. LTA, or light transmittance aggregometry, remaining as our most detailed method for evaluating platelet function assays. Whole blood impedance aggregometry, providing platelet testing in a more physiologic environment. And finally, Lumi aggregometry, evaluating platelet secretion by measuring ATP release from platelet granules. So understanding yung strength limitations of these tests would help us select the most appropriate diagnostic approach sa pag-evaluate ng platelet disorders. Now, we transition to from primary hemostasis to secondary hemostasis. So, secondary hemostasis involves the coagulation cascade, which generates fibrin to stabilize the platelet plug formed during primary hemostasis. So, this process involves a complex series of enzymatic reactions involving coagulation factors. So, in the lab, we evaluate secondary hemostasis by way of several major screening tests such as our PT, APTT, thrombin time, and fibrinogen assays. And each test would evaluate yung iba-ibang portions ng coagulation cascade. So, these screening tests are extremely valuable kasi they would help us localize or pinpoint abnormalities within the coagulation system. And once an abnormal screening test is identified, again, same lang, when we do yung pag-check ng workflow and algorithmically, we would then proceed to more specialized testing such as, let's say, mixing studies or factor assays to determine the specific underlying causes. So let's begin by discussing prothrombin time, or commonly abbreviated as PT. So the PT test would evaluate the extrinsic and common pathways of the coagulation cascade. So ano yung coagulation factors na nakikita in extrinsic and common pathways? Let's review. Ano yung mga factors na yun? Let's see. Guzman, Absent. Bauzon Diana. Bauzon Diana. Okay, so PT would evaluate first yung extrinsic um, coagulation factors starting with factor 7, as well as common coagulation pathway factors 1, 2, 5, and 10. So in clinical practice, it has several important uses. So first, it would help us detect coagulation factor deficiencies, particularly those that are being evaluated, which is yung nasa extrinsic and common coagulation pathways. Secondly, it is widely used for monitoring oral anticoagulant therapy, particularly warfarin. Third, PT can help assess liver function because most coagulation factors are synthesized in the liver. And finally, PT is used in evaluating disorders such as vitamin K deficiency and disseminated intravascular coagulation. So it is one of the most commonly ordered coagulation tests in clinical laboratories. So usually it is tested in conjunction with APTT as our parang starter or screening tests for coagulation for assessing if merong coagulopathies. So again, 'di ba, factor 7 and tissue factor for the extrinsic pathways. Tapos again, 10, 5, 2, and 1 yung ina-assess here. So for the methodology, PT assays measures the time required for a fibrin clot to form after activation ng extrinsic coagulation pathway. And the specimen used is PPP or platelet-poor plasma obtained from citrated whole blood. So as we discussed earlier, sodium citrate binds calcium to prevent clotting during specimen handling. So during the PT assay, two major reagents are added to the plasma. First is yung tissue thromboplastin reagent and calcium ions. The thromboplastin reagent contains two important components, yung tissue factor or factor 3 as well as phospholipid. So kapag inad tong mga reagents na ito, the extrinsic pathway is then activated. So usually siya yung again components ng ating PT reagent. After niyang ma-activate, it would lead to the activation of factor 7 and ultimately the common pathway where fibrin clot formation would then occur. So the instrument then measures the time required for clot formation, which is reported as the prothrombin time. So this reaction effectively simulates ano ba yung nangyayari when tissue injury exposes tissue factor to circulating blood, triggering the extrinsic coagulation pathway. Okay, so one challenge sa pag-test natin ng prothrombin time is that, di ba, different laboratories could use different thromboplastin reagents depending on the machine that they are using, ano ang reagent component ng manufacturer, And these reagents would vary in their sensitivity to clotting factors. And because of this variation, PT values measured in one lab may not be comparable sa values measured elsewhere. So to solve this problem, meron tayong INR or the International Normalized Ratio, which was developed. So the INR standardizes PT results by accounting for the sensitivity of the thromboplastin reagent, which is then expressed as the International Sensitivity Index or the ISI. So by applying this correction factor, PT results from different labs can then be standardized and then compared. So this standardization is particularly important, especially for patients na nagre-receive ng warfarin therapy, kasi precise monitoring of anticoagulation levels is highly critical. So kahit saan lab sila magpa-test, INR would be particularly useful in ensuring that interpretation of results remains standardized. So in clinical practice, usually INR values ang ini-interpret rather than the raw PT value itself, especially when monitoring warfarin treatment. So usually talagang ginagawa na siya in conjunction. It is always PT-INR kapag nire-request. So for the interpretation, kapag prolonged ang PT, it suggests a problem within the extrinsic or common pathways of the coagulation cascade. And one possible cause is factor 7 deficiency, which specifically affects the extrinsic pathway. Another possibility is, of course, deficiency sa common pathway factors. PT prolongation can also occur in vitamin K deficiency, since vitamin K is required sa pag-synthesize ng iba-ibang clotting factors, including factors 2, 7, 9, and 10. And again, because most clotting factors ay synthesized from our liver disease can also prolong PT, warfarin therapy, which interferes in vitamin K dependent clotting factor synthesis, and again in TIC, where clotting factors are consumed dahil sa widespread coagulation activation. Severe hypofibrinogenemia. So interpretation of PT results requires correlation with clinical contexts and other coagulation tests. Aside from PT, we also have APTT, which is a major screening test evaluating the intrinsic and common pathways of the coagulation cascade. So that would include factors, yung common pathway factors earlier. Tapos factors 11, 9, 8, just to name a few. So it would serve as a screening test for intrinsic pathway deficiencies, including hemophilia A and B. And secondly, it is used to monitor yung UHT or yung unfractionated heparin therapy. And can also be used to help detect mga circulating inhibitors such as yung lupus anticoagulant and specific factor inhibitors. So APTT is one of the most important lab tests used for evaluating intrinsic factor or rather intrinsic coagulation abnormalities. So it also uses platelet-poor plasma similar sa PT testing. And then yung plasma reagent or rather the plasma is then mixed with the reagent called partial thromboplastin, which serves as a phospholipid substitute. So, hindi katulad ng PT reagents, this reagent does not contain tissue factor, which allows the intrinsic pathway to be evaluated. So, the reagent mixture would also include a contact activator tulad ng kaolin, silica, and ellagic acid. So these substances would activate yung factor 12, initiating yung intrinsic pathways. And then after incubation, calcium chloride is then added to the mixture to restore coagulation. After mag-add ng calcium, the intrinsic cascade would then proceed until fibrin clot formation occurs, and the instrument would measure yung time again required para mag-form yung clot. So, same principle in testing with PT. It would measure gaano katagal does it take the intrinsic pathway to generate a fibrin clot. For the interpretation, prolonged APTT would indicate a defect within the intrinsic or common pathways of the coagulation cascade. And one of the most classic causes is hemophilia A, resulting from factor 8 deficiency. Another is hemophilia B, caused by factor 11 deficiency. And additionally, severe forms ng von Willebrand disease can also prolong APTT since von Willebrand factor stabilizes yung factor 8 sa circulation. So kapag mababa ang von Willebrand factor levels, factor 8 levels decrease as well. Another important cause is heparin therapy. So unfractionated heparin enhances the activity of the antithrombin, which inhibits several coagulation factors, prolonging clotting time. Circulating inhibitors can also prolong APTT, such as the lupus anticoagulant and specific coagulation factor inhibitors. And finally, severe systemic disorders or advanced liver disease may prolong APTT due to reduced clotting factor levels. So interpretation of APTT results must always consider clinical context and additional lab testing. Next is thrombin time or TT. So unlike PT and APTT, this na nag-evaluate ng multi-steps in the coagulation cascade, thrombin time would focus only on one very specific stage of the coagulation, which is yung final step of the clotting process, which is the conversion ng fibrinogen into fibrin. So this step occurs when the enzyme thrombin cleaves fibrinogen molecules, allowing fibrin strands to polymerize and form a stable clot. And because this test directly measures this step, it would bypass yung mga earlier coagulation factors. Therefore, it would specifically evaluate fibrinogen concentration, fibrin polymerization, and the presence of thrombin inhibitors. This makes it particularly useful for identifying abnormalities involving fibrinogen or thrombin activity. So for the procedure in its assay, it is relatively simple compared sa PT and APTT. First, we prepare plated pure plasma again from citrated blood. Then a standardized amount of thrombin reagent is added directly sa plasma. And because thrombin converts fibrinogen into fibrin, the test measures the time required for fibrin clot formation. And since binabypass niya yung mga earlier coagulation factors, na nandito sa taas, the result would depend primarily if adequate ba yung fibrinogen concentration, proper ba yung fibrin polymerization, tapos may absent ba ang thrombin inhibitor. So if any of these factors are abnormal, your thrombin time will then be prolonged. So it just focuses sa final stage ng clot formation. So prolonged thrombin time would suggest a problem involving fibrinogen or thrombin activity. One possible cause is hypofibrinogenemia, referring to low fibrinogen levels. Another is dysfibrinogenemia, wherein meron siyang dysfunction despite the adequate level in the blood. So it cannot form fibrin properly. Another is it is extremely sensitive to heparin contamination, yung thrombin time testing. So even small amounts of heparin can interfere sa thrombin activity and kaya niyang pahabain ang thrombin time. Similarly, direct thrombin inhibitors such as certain anticoagulant drugs may also prolong thrombin time. Another is yung mga fibrin degradation products or FDPs, which interferes with fibrin polymerization. And again, finally, in severe DIC, where fibrinogen is consumed and fibrin fragments will accumulate. So, thrombin testing provides valuable information about fibrinogen abnormalities and thrombin inhibition. Aside from that, we have fibrinogen assays, which measures the concentration or functional activity of fibrinogen, also known as factor 1. So fibrinogen is a critical protein in the common coagulation pathway. So kapag yung thrombin, na-cleave niya ang fibrinogen and fibrin strands are produced, this would form the structural framework of the clot. And because fibrinogen is essential sa clot formation, measuring its concentration can provide us important diagnostic information. Fibrinogen testing is commonly performed using mga functional assays, measuring the ability of fibrinogen to form fibrin. In some cases, immunologic assays may also be used to measure fibrinogen antigen levels. So fibrinogen testing is particularly useful in evaluating disorders um, such as DIC, severe liver disease, massive transfusion, and inherited fibrinogen disorders. So fibrinogen assay would then provide us essential information about the substrate required for fibrin clot formation. So moving on to a particular fibrinogen assay, when it comes to methodology, we have the Klaus method. So this is a functional fibrinogen assay, meaning ina-evaluate niya yung ability ng fibrinogen to participate in clot formation rather than simply measuring yung presence niya or just simply quantifying it. So the principle of the Klaus method is based on a simple relationship. So the clotting time is inversely proportional to the fibrinogen concentration. So here's how it works. So first, yung patient plasma is diluted to minimize yung influence of other coagulation factors. Then, a high concentration of thrombin is added dun sa diluted plasma. And because thrombin directly converts fibrinogen into fibrin, the clot formation time depende kung gaano kadami yung fibrinogen present in the sample. So the instrument measures the clotting time, and this value is compared with the calibration curve generated sa mga reference plasma with known fibrinogen concentrations. So using the calibration curve, the instrument would calculate the functional fibrinogen concentration in the patient sample. So thus, the Klaus method would provide a quantitative functional measurement of fibrinogen activity. So actually, sa coagulation studies, when you go on to your internship, siya sa mga pinaka-hassle i-control. Kasi again, kino-compare natin yung clotting time ng sample sa value na kino-compare natin sa calibration curve generated from reference plasmas. So usually, ilan nga to, when I was working, parang 5 or 6 reference plasma yung ginagamit ko in conjunction with testing yung sample ng patient. So, doon natin makikita if pasok siya sa control or calibration. And again, this is highly specific lang for fibrinogen assay. Di siya ganun kadalas in-order. Talagang pinaka-basic na we order sa lab is yung screening test such as yung PT and APTT. Pero, ayun, na-order na siya for patients who are parang pang ano na siya roll in and roll out of specific coagulopathy present. So when it comes to interpretation, we have both decreased and increased levels that can provide clinically significant information. So kapag mababa ang level ng fibrinogen, it can occur in, again, DIC, since fibrinogen is consumed kapag nagkakaroon ng widespread clot formation. Another is severe liver disease. Decreased din kasi yung fibrinogen levels kapag patients undergo massive transfusion kasi nadadilute yung coagulation factors in the blood. And in addition, certain congenital fibrinogen deficiencies can also lead to reduced fibrinogen levels. Conversely, so kapag mataas yung levels ng fibrinogen, this can occur in acute inflammatory states. Kasi fibrinogen also functions as an APR or acute phase reactant. Ano pa nga ang iba nating acute phase reactant na minimeasure natin sa blood to assess for inflammation? In immunology and serology, ano pa yung mga ating other acute phase reactants? So yun, ang pinaka-common and most ordered test would be CRP or C-reactive protein. So other than that, yung fibrinogen also has that certain function or rather quality. Tumataas din siya kapag may acute inflammatory states kasi it's also an acute phase reactant. Aside from that, elevated levels may also be observed during pregnancy, trauma, or malignancy. Thus, fibrinogen results can be interpreted or must be interpreted in conjunction with clinical findings and other coagulation tests. Okay, so we first started with platelet function tests, then yung mga screening tests for coagulation cascade testing. Let's move on to specific factor assays, mixing studies, and inhibitor screening. But before we proceed, do you have any questions so far? Or none? Alam ko na-discuss na sa inyo to eh, so parang review na lang ata siya. Anyway, asan ako? So again, 'di ba? We always start with yung mga general screening tests. So kapag let's say there's an abnormality in your PT in APTT, and then it would warrant further investigation to determine the underlying cause. And we utilize specific factor assays, mixing studies, and inhibitor testing in order to further differentiate and, as much as possible, try to get as much diagnostic clarity as possible for for these patients. Since, di ba, ang dami talagang factors, components in our system that is involved. So, um, being able to more accurately pinpoint which factor or component is causing um, parang dysregulation or leading to yung mga clinical manifestations in patients would allow us to provide with a more tailor-fitted assessment and plan to for these patients. So again, additional investigation is required, and this next stage again of testing includes yung mga specific factor assays na mixing studies and inhibitor testing. So these procedures can help us determine whether the abnormal clotting result is caused by meron bang clotting factor na deficient sa system or meron bang inhibitor na present sa katawan ng patient, or is it a combination of both conditions? So this step is essential in the diagnostic process kasi factor deficiencies and inhibitors can produce similar results in screening tests, but they require very different, again, clinical management. So we must try and again give as much diagnostic clarity as possible to differentiate between all of these possibilities. So let's start first with mga specific coagulation factor assays. So they are used to quantitatively measure the activity of individual clotting factors. So these tests are performed again kapag yung screening assays such as PT or APTT are abnormal, which would suggest a possible coagulation factor deficiency. So factor assays are essential for diagnosing several inherited bleeding disorders such as hemophilia A, resulting again from factor 8 deficiency, hemophilia B from factor 11 deficiency. Factor assays can also identify deficiencies in other clotting factors such as factor 11 and 7. Also, again, rare congenital factor deficiencies. So these tests allow the lab to determine which specific clotting factor is deficient, providing a definitive diagnosis or diagnosis. So, when it comes to its methodology, most ng mga coagulation factor assays use what is called a one-stage clotting assay. So, when we talk of the general principle here, it is based on correction of clotting time using factor deficient plasma. So, first, yung patient plasma is minimix natin siya with a plasma that we know lacks a specific factor or it is factor deficient. So, for example, if gusto natin i-measure yung factor 8 activity ng patient, yung plasma niya is ihahalo natin sa known plasma na walang factor 8. So, the mixture is then subjected to either PT or APTT-based clotting assays, depending on which pathway the factor belongs to. So, always remember yung coagulation cascade, which factors are present in which pathway, para malaman natin which clotting assays we will refer to when we do specific coagulation factor assay testing. So, yung resulting clotting time is then compared with a calibration curve generated from reference plasma samples. So, medyo familiar. This is quite the same as fibrinogen assays. This would allow the laboratory to calculate the percentage activity of the specific clotting factor. So, factor assays would provide quantitative measurement of individual coagulation factor activity. Aside from that, we also have mixing studies. Sorry, wait lang. So again, i-discuss kasi ito ni Prof. Valdez sa inyo, I think as a pre-lab by next week. So, very basic introduction lang. So this is one of the most important diagnostic tools that we utilize in coagulation testing, the mixing study. So these are performed when PT or APTT results are prolonged, and we need to determine whether, again, yung abnormality is due to coagulation factor deficiency or a circulating inhibitor. So, ang principle of the mixing study is based on the ability ng normal plasma to supply missing coagulation factors. So, in this procedure, patient plasma is mixed 1:1 ratio with normal pooled plasma, and the clotting test, usually PT or APTT, is repeated. So, if halimbawa the patient had abnormal clotting time, pero after natin siya i-mix with normal pooled plasma that contains all coagulation factors, if na-correct siya after, this suggests na yung patient plasma lacks a clotting factor na na-supplement ng normal plasma that we added onto it. Pero if yung clotting factor ay hindi nag-correct, this suggests the presence of an inhibitor na nag-i-interfere sa coagulation reaction. So kahit maglagay ka ng normal plasma, if may inhibitor present sa sample, the reaction will not occur. So thus, mixing studies serve as a critical diagnostic step in evaluating abnormal coagulation screening tests. And actually, siya yung, I think, for me lang naman personally, highlight when it comes to coagulation studies kasi ang saya, nag-mix-mix ka lang ng plasma sa lab. Pero di siya masaya minsan kasi toxic gawin. Aside from mixing studies, we also have inhibitors of coagulation. So again, kapag yung mixing study nag-indicate that the abnormal clotting time does not correct even with the addition of normal plasma, the next step is to consider the presence of coagulation inhibitors. And coagulation inhibitors, they are substances that interfere with clotting factor activity that leads to prolonged clotting time. And these inhibitors are broadly divided into two categories, yung specific and non-specific inhibitors. So specific inhibitors, may particular coagulation factor siya na tina-target, reducing its activity. Non-specific inhibitors interfere with phospholipid-dependent coagulation reactions. So this would affect multiple clotting tests. So understanding the type of inhibitor present is important because these conditions often nagre-require sila ng specialized diagnostic testing and also clinical management. So let's start first with specific factor inhibitors. So again, they are antibodies directed against individual clotting factors. And the most clinically important example is the factor VIII inhibitor. So this occurs mainly in two situations. So first, they may develop sa patients na may hemophilia A who receive factor replacement therapy. So over time, yung immune system, they may recognize the replacement factor as foreign and produce antibodies against it. Another is factor VIII inhibitors may occur in individuals with acquired hemophilia, which is a rare autoimmune disorder. So these inhibitors neutralizes yung activity ng factor VIII, leading to prolonged APTT as well as manifesting in severe bleeding. So a key diagnostic feature is that yung APTT hindi siya nagko-correct in mixing studies kasi the inhibitor continues to inactivate yung clotting factor even after normal plasma is added. So in many cases, yung mga ganitong inhibitor, they also show time-dependent inhibition. So minsan yung effect can become stronger after we incubate the sample. Next is non-specific inhibitors. And the most common example here is the lupus anticoagulant. So despite its name, ang lupus anticoagulant, hindi lang siya nakikita sa patients na may lupus. And paradoxically, it is often associated with thrombosis rather than bleeding. So lupus anticoagulants, they are anti-phospholipid antibodies na nagbabind sa phospholipid protein complexes involved in coagulation. And dahil maraming coagulation test na nagre-rely sa phospholipid reagents, if you recall kanina yung composition ng ating reagents for PT testing, di ba may phospholipid there? So these antibodies interfere with phospholipid-dependent clotting reactions. So it can produce prolonged APTT results in vitro. So however, in the body, these antibodies promote hypercoagulability, meaning ini-increase niya yung risk natin to DVT or deep vein thrombosis. Ay, wait, nasa next slide na ata yun. Ay, hindi ko nalagay. So, sulat niya na lang. So again, sa katawan natin, nagpa-promote siya ng hypercoagulability. So nagkakaroon ng DVT or deep vein thrombosis, pulmonary embolism, as well as complications to pregnancy. So like other inhibitors, lupus anticoagulant, they typically produce APTT na hindi nako-correct in mixing studies. So specialized tests, such as yung dilute Russell Viper venom time, ginagamit siya to confirm yung presence ng lupus anticoagulant. Other than testing for specific inhibitors, we also have a specific coagulation factor inhibitor na when we suspect, we utilize the Bethesda assay. So this is especially for factor VIII inhibitor. So we want to determine gaano ba kalakas itong inhibitor na to, we utilize this assay. So the Bethesda assay is designed to quantify the strength of factor 8 inhibitors in patient plasma. So yung principle niya is based on measuring how much the inhibitor neutralizes factor 8 activity in normal plasma. And this is the basic procedure. So yung patient plasma na nagko-contain ng suspected inhibitor, again, it is mixed with a normal pooled plasma which contains functional factor 8. So yung mixture, it is then incubated, allowing any inhibitor present to interact sa factor 8 doon sa normal plasma that we added. So after incubation, yung natitirang factor 8 activity is measured. So if the inhibitor neutralizes yung factor 8, subsequently, yung measured activity will decrease. And the result is expressed in BU or Bethesda unit. So one Bethesda unit is defined as the amount of inhibitor that neutralizes 50% of factor 8 activity in normal plasma after incubation. So this assay would provide us a clue on a quantitative measurement doon sa strength of inhibitor. Kasi although the inhibitor is, let's say, present sa sample, sa patient sample, nagva-vary yun depende on how much of the inhibitor is present. So this is a very useful test to assess its strength. So again, we utilize additional testing for inhibitors. So kapag we suspect them, again, particularly in lupus anticoagulant, additional confirmatory tests is required. So again, as I said, one of the most widely used assays is yung dilute Russell Viper venom time or DRVVT. So yung Russell Viper venom, nagko-contain siya ng enzymes na nag-activate ng factor 10, bypassing yung earlier portions of the intrinsic pathway. And dahil itong reaction na ito, it still depends on phospholipid, it is sensitive to anti-phospholipid antibodies such as yung lupus anticoagulant. So, if merong lupus anticoagulant present sa patient sample, itong dilute Russell Viper venom time would be prolonged. And confirmatory testing includes phospholipid neutralization procedures. So in these tests, yung excess phospholipid, it will be added to the reaction. And if the clotting time shortens, after natin mag-add ng phospholipid addition, it supports yung presence ng inhibitor to phospholipids or phospholipid-dependent inhibitors. So these specialized assays are essential for confirming yung mga anti-phospholipid antibody syndromes. So, actually, ito na yung last portion ng lecture. Before we move on, meron ba kayong questions when it comes to assays we utilize for the secondary hemostasis? Question so far? May mga tanong or okay na to proceed? Kindly give a react na lang. Okay, so far, we have discussed tests na nag-evaluate ng platelet function and the coagulation cascade. So the final stage of hemostasis involves fibrinolysis, which is the process yung breakdown ng fibrin clots kapag nag-occur na ang healing process. So laboratory evaluation of fibrinolysis would focus on detecting yung mga FDPs or fibrin degradation products and assessing yung balance between clot formation and clot breakdown. So So key laboratory tests that we use to evaluate fibrinolysis would include yung FTPs, D-dimer testing, and euglobin clot lysis time. In addition to these tests, modern labs would they have been including using yung mga global hemostasis assays such as TEG or thromboelastography and ROTM or rotational thromboelastometry. So these tests would provide a dynamic assessment of the entire clotting process, these last two, including clot formation stability as well as breakdown. So such global assays are particularly useful in, let's say, trauma care, massive transfusion protocols, and surgical settings. So again, it would be useful for certain important clinical situations. So again, yung DIC, kasi in DIC, di ba, there's widespread activation ng coagulation leading to the formation of numerous microthrombi. So as these clots are broken down, fibrin degradation products accumulate in the circulation. Another important application is the evaluation ng thromboembolic disorders such as DVT or deep vein thrombosis and PE or pulmonary embolism. Elevated fibrinolysis markers, particularly, D-dimer may suggest the presence of active clot formation and breakdown. Fibrinolysis testing is also useful in cases of hyperfibrinolysis na merong excessive clot breakdown leading to bleeding. Additionally, these tests would play an important role sa pag-manage ng massive transfusion, again, and trauma-associated coagulopathy, where the balance between coagulation and fibrinolysis would become severely disrupted. So, iisa-isayin natin yung mga tests that we use, starting with the FTPs or fibrin degradation products. So again, they are fragments na napoproduce when the enzyme plasmin breaks down fibrin or fibrinogen. So in other words, yung presence ng FTPs are biochemical evidence na fibrinolysis is actively occurring. So when plasmin degrades fibrin clots, various fragments are released into the bloodstream. So elevated FTP levels would indicate na clot breakdown is taking place, either sa part ng normal physiologic processes or as a part of pathological conditions. However, an important limitation sa FTP testing is that it detects fragments both from fibrin and fibrinogen degradation. Therefore, FTP tests, they are less specific than D-dimer assays for detecting intravascular clot formation. Pero nevertheless, it still remains as a useful tool for identifying conditions involving increased fibrinolysis. So again, if i-analyze natin siya step by step, di ba plasmin is activated, this thus beginning fibrinolysis. Tapos, fibrin and fibrinogen, they are degraded. So, fragments are produced, releasing FTPs that are then detected in the plasma. So, again, FTP assays detect yung mga degradation fragments from both soluble fibrinogen and cross-linked fibrin. So, this explains their reduced specificity in comparison to other tests such as D-dimer. So when it comes to methodology, FTP or fibrin degradation products are assessed with the use of latex agglutination immunoassays. So in this test, small latex particles are coated with antibodies that recognize fibrin degradation products. But parang may tumutunog. Anyway, Asan ako? Okay, so if you recall, 'di ba, nag-lab activity na kayo in immunosero. So, yung latex agglutination immunoassays, they can be used to detect yung FTPs. Tapos ina-assess kung hanggang saan nag-agglutinate or clump together yung latex particles. So, when yung patient plasma containing FTPs is na-mix natin with antibody-coated latex particles, FTP antigens bind to the antibodies. Tapos, yung antigen-antibody interaction would cause the latex particles to agglutinate or clump together, which can be visually observed or measured even instrumentally. So, the presence of visible agglutination indicates that FTPs are present in the plasma. So, aside from latex agglutination assays, may mga labs na gumagamit ng immunoturbidimetric assays na nagme-measure ng change sa optical density caused by the complexes of antigen and antibody. So these immunologic methods allow relatively rapid detection ng fibrinolysis markers in clinical samples. Let's see. So when it comes to interpretation, kapag elevated ang FTP level sa blood, it indicates that fibrin or fibrinogen degradation again is occurring within the body. So, however, FDP elevation again does not necessarily indicate the exact cause. It is quite non-specific. So, several conditions may lead to increased FDP levels. So, one of the most important is yung DIC. FDP levels may also increase in again DVTs, pulmonary embolism, where fibrin clots form and are subsequently degraded. Other causes include severe liver disease affecting coagulation and fibrinolysis, also following trauma or major surgery due to increased clot turnover kasi nagkakaroon ng tissue repair. And because FDP tests detect degradation of both fibrin and fibrinogen, they are considered sensitive but not highly specific markers of fibrinolysis. So, please take note of those. As you saw nung exam nyo sa chem, I put in lab results. So, let's say, if halimbawa maglalagay ako ng case of FTP na may, let's say, latex immunoassay, baka kasi mawindang kayo. Let's see. Next. Okay, moving on to D-dimer. Again, this is a specific fibrin degradation product formed only kapag nagkaroon ng cross-linked fibrin that is broken down by plasmin. So, this distinction is important. Kasi again, while yung FTP tests, kaya niya mag-detect ng fragments from both fibrin and fibrinogen degradation, D-dimer originates only from stabilized fibrin clots. Therefore, ang presence ng D-dimer in the sample indicates that two processes have occurred. So, coagulation na nagpo-produce ng cross-linked fibrin and fibrinolysis breaking down that fibrin. So, this makes D-dimer a much more specific indicator of intravascular clot formation and breakdown in comparison with FDP testing. So for this reason, the dimer test is widely used in the clinical evaluation of thrombotic disorders. For the method or principle, so most D-dimer assays rely on immunologic detection using antibodies that recognize yung D-dimer epitopes. So common assay formats include latex immunoassays, enzyme-linked immunosorbent assays or ELISA, and immunoturbidimetric assays. So in latex-based assays, again, antibody-coated latex particles agglutinate in the presence of D-dimer fragments. ELISA methods are considered highly sensitive, though depende sa machine, it may take longer to perform. Immunoturbidimetric assays measures changes sa light transmission caused by the antibody-antigen complexes that would allow automated quantification. So these immunologic techniques provide rapid and sensitive detection of fibrin degradation products associated with thrombus formation. So as you see, as we proceed forward, we are been utilizing tests that are leaning more on mga immunosero, yung mga principles. Ganun talaga siya. So, when it comes to screening tests, mga normal coagulation based machines would suffice. Pero for more specific testing such as this, we would utilize um, other methods such as yung paggamit ng antigen-antibody complexes, kasi the body can be quite specific depending on the antibody and antigen we are referring to. Pero always take note that it is not without its limitations as well. So I hope you remember that from your lectures in IS. For the interpretation of D-dimer results, so elevated D-dimer levels, they are associated with conditions that involve active clot formation and fibrinolysis. So paulit-ulit, but its most common clinical use is in the evaluation of, again, DVT, PE, and DIC. However, D-dimer is not specific for thrombosis, and many other conditions can also cause elevated levels, including recent surgery, trauma, pregnancy, malignancy, and inflammatory disorders. Actually, this was part of the panel before when we test for COVID-19 patients. We also check yung D-dimer levels nila. Sometimes, depending on the prognosis and yung clinical presentation, they also order yung mga fibrin degradation products. So, anyway, so because of this, since madaming conditions can cause elevation in levels, D-dimer testing is most useful for ruling out thromboembolism in patients with low clinical probability rather than confirming it. It's vast, so it means that normal D-dimer result has a high negative predictive value, meaning that when it is present or detected, thromboembolism is unlikely. So, ginagamit siya pang rule out rather than rule in. As you can see, it has elevations in quite a lot of disease processes or normal physiologic processes as well. Aside from D-dimer, we also have euglobulin clot lysis time. So it measures yung overall fibrinolytic activity. So it specifically it evaluates yung balance between yung plasminogen activation, plasmin activity, and fibrinolytic inhibitors. So by measuring how quickly a clot formed from this fraction dissolves, we can assess the overall fibrinolytic potential ng plasma. So, thus, it provides an integrated measure of fibrinolysis activity. So, it involves several procedural steps. So, first, yung plasma sample is acidified. So, once it is acidified, it causes precipitation ng euglobulin fraction. And this fraction contains yung fibrinogen, plasmin, and plasminogen activators, but it excludes many inhibitors of fibrinolysis. So the precipitated euglobulin fraction is then redissolved in buffer solution. Tapos, we add thrombin, inducing formation of a fibrin clot. And then next is we measure the time required for the clot to dissolve, which represents the fibrinolytic activity of the sample. So this means that this test or euglobulin clot lysis time measures how rapidly yung fibrinolytic system ng body can break down a fibrin clot. Excuse me. Sorry. So, interpretation ng ECLT results is based sa time required for clot lysis. So, kapag masyadong mabilis mag-dissolve yung clot, it could suggest hyperfibrinolysis. Yung fibrin is being broken down excessively. And hyperfibrinolysis can lead to bleeding disorders kasi yung clot ay nasisira bago pa nila ma-stabilize yung injured blood vessel. On the other hand, kapag masyadong prolonged yung clot lysis time, this could suggest reduced fibrinolytic activity, meaning it can contribute to thrombotic tendencies kasi clots persists longer than normal. So this test is very helpful in evaluating the balance between clot formation and clot breakdown, which is essential for maintaining ang normal homeostasis or hemostasis rather of the body. I think nasa last portion na tayo. So for the last part, this is more of assessment lang ng mga current methods that have been produced so far for coagulation studies. So, papadaanan lang natin siya. So, as we saw earlier, diba, traditional coagulation tests, it evaluates isolated components sa coagulation cascade. So, for example, diba, PT can evaluate the extrinsic pathway, while APTT would measure the intrinsic pathway. However, these tests not evaluate yung entire clotting process as it occurs in vivo. So this limitation led to the development of global hemostasis assays, which assesses the entire process of clot formation and breakdown. So since it measures the entire process, it includes measurement ng clot initiation, formation, strength, stability, and fibrinolysis. And two major global hemostasis assays used in clinical practice is yung TEG or thromboelastography and ROTM or rotational thromboelastometry. So these tests can provide a dynamic picture of hemostasis, making them especially valuable in critical care settings. Parang medyo POCT yung dating nila. So, for thromboelastography, it measures yung viscoelastic changes sa whole blood as the clot forms and dissolves. So, in this instrument, a sample of whole blood is placed into a cup that slowly oscillates. So, a pin suspended within the sample detects yung changes in resistance as the clot forms. So, kapag yung fibrin strands and platelet they begin to link together, the clot becomes stronger and the resistance to motion increases. So yung instrument would then convert yung changes na nadedetect niya into a graphical tracing, which shows the dynamics of clot formation, strengthening, and eventual breakdown. So it uses whole blood. So it reflects contributions from coagulation factors, platelets, fibrin formation, and fibrinolysis. So it is particularly important in trauma surgery, liver transplantation, and massive transfusion protocols. And I think lastly, we have rotational thromboelastometry or ROTM. So it is closely related to TEG. So it operates on the same fundamental principle, measuring viscoelastic changes during clot formation and breakdown. Pero here, the mechanism is reversed. So kanina, we utilizes a cup with a pin that oscillates. Dito naman, the pin rotates within a stationary cup containing a blood sample. So, all the same, it provides rapid evaluation of clot formation, firmness, stability, and fibrinolysis. So, due to its speed and ability to evaluate clot dynamics in real time, it is frequently used or has important applications in surgical and clinical care settings. I think that's it. So for my reference, I only utilized your main textbook, yung Rodax. So if you would like to do further readings, this is in chapter 41 or yung hemostasis lab evaluations. And I think that's the end of the lecture. Thank you so much for the active participation and for listening. Before we end the session, meron ba kayong mga questions so far na pwede ko i-address? If you have any questions, you can send me a direct message or you can raise your hand. So, again, I'll just repeat my announcement na i-upload ko yung lecture. Actually, upload ko na to immediately after we end the session. Unit test. Actually, I'm not sure. I think it would be better to ask Prof. Lozada how many items yung unit test for next week. Pero I'll also ask him na lang. Baka mag-announce na lang din siya. Tapos, ano pa ba? Yeah, ipopost ko yung slide deck. Tapos, I'll publish yung PLQ nyo later. 5 items lang naman, pero you have until midnight or 11:59 to answer it. So, actually, if wala na kayong questions, you can go. Pero I will remain here in the meeting for an additional, let's say, 5 minutes in case lang may mga gusto pang magtanong. If you have any more questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to send me a message in Canvas or mag-email, and I'll try to respond as early as I can. So again, thank you very much for listening. Nasa pre-finals na tayo. So, good luck for this term. So, ano ba? Expect na may interpretation ako ilalagay sa exam nyo. Pero sa unit test, siguro wala. If wala na kayong questions, you can go. Thank you again for listening.